let's get started. Let me tell you a bit about our two guests. Bruce Katz is the director of the Nowak Metro Finance Lab at Drexel University, the co-author of The New Localism with the late, great Jeremy Nowak, who is also the founding chairman of The Citizen, and is the former chief of staff to the HUD Secretary, Henry Cisneros, and was also a senior advisor to President Obama's first HUD Secretary. He has forgotten more about cities than most of us will ever know. And Mayor Nan Whaley was first elected in 2013 after serving on the Dayton City Commission for 8 years, the youngest woman to ever hold such a seat. As mayor, she's focused on community development, manufacturing, women, children, and is the second vice president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. You may have become aware of her when last year there was a tragic mass shooting in her city of Dayton. And I have to say, she reacted with such calm and emotional intelligence, and many of us across the nation took note of this inspiring young leader. I actually first became aware of her when Pete Buttigieg announced for president, and he gave the second best speech that day. She gave a speech at his rally introducing him that made me call Bruce Katz and say, who is this person? So I'm thrilled to invite all of you. And you may have noticed that Bruce Katz is not on the screen. Under the rubric of things you don't plan for, there's a power outage in Alexandria, Virginia. So here's Bruce Katz. Ignore that telephone number because that's him. And I'm holding his phone up to the screen, and hopefully we can have the dialogue. Bruce, are you there with us?
I am here. Thanks, Larry.
That's great. I'll let you guys get to it, and when you're ready for questions, let me know, and I'll start reading them.
Okay. Well, thanks, Larry. It's great to see Mayor Whaley, and I'm sorry to everyone watching that I'm in the middle of some kind of climate extreme weather event in the middle of a pandemic. But this is the way of the world today.
Only you, Bruce. Only you.
Well, I mean, most of the issue here is I just can't remember my Apple ID password, so I can't really get anything on my phone. In any event, if Jeremy and I were writing the book today, The New Localism, when we first wrote it, we had a subtitle, How Cities Thrive in the Age of Populism. I think our subtitle today would be How Cities Survive During a Pandemic Crisis. I mean, it's no secret to anyone watching this that cities are on the front lines of this crisis. They were on the front lines of the public health crisis and have been for several months now with their states. And they've also been on the front lines of the concurrent economic crisis, given the shutdown of their economies. So I thought we would start with Mayor Whaley, who's a great friend and an inspirational leader, by just having you describe Dayton, really where it is, how large, its distinctive strengths. For those who have never visited Dayton, it's an incredible city. Please get in your car and drive right after this conversation. But just give us a preview from a Daytonian of your great city.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce, and it's nice to talk to you. Even no matter what happens, you figure out a way to get it done. And I really am excited to be on this program with the Philadelphia Citizen. I've been an admirer of the work of what the Citizen's doing for the city of Philadelphia and its community. So I was really excited when Bruce asked me to be a part of this conversation. Dayton is a bit of a ways from Philadelphia. It's an hour north of Cincinnati, Ohio, and an hour west of Columbus, Ohio, on the western side of the state. It's a town of about 140-some thousand people. The region itself is a little over around 800,000 or 900,000 people, depending on who's counting and how they're counting. It is the sixth largest city in the state, but the metro is the fourth largest metro in the state. We are a city that has been one that has been around innovation and entrepreneurship in the 1900s. Basically, everything that people used in the 1950s and 60s were nearly invented or had some part of Dayton in them. from the airplane to the pop tap can to even the search engine has some of its beginning starts in Dayton. The city also is the host of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is the largest single site employer in the state of Ohio, and what we affectionately call the Air Force's brain. So we have a lot of intellectual capital just from the number of people that work both inside and outside the fence, as we like to say, at the Air Force Base. Dayton is an opening and inclusive city. It's just, this commission, I've been at City Hall now for 15 years, and as mayor, we say that our mission and vision for our community is that no matter who you love, where you live, or where you come from, you're welcome in Dayton. And so we try to be as welcoming as possible in an area that is surrounded by some of the most conservative parts of the state, which makes for an interesting political conversation for us in Dayton. But I've always been proud of a community that holds true to its roots and beliefs and its value in inclusivity and diversity. The Great Recession did quite a number on Dayton. I would probably argue that the recession hit Detroit hardest and Dayton second hardest. We lost around 16% of our jobs during that period in the region, mostly because we are a manufacturing, in addition to the Air Force Base. We like to make things in Dayton. It's what our backbone and fabric is. And so pivoting, as we're doing here, is something that we've been working hard in Dayton to do. And try also as mayor to raise the voice of mid-sized cities like Dayton, because there's many cities across the Midwest and upper North and Mid-Atlantic region that are very similar to us that sometimes get missed in the conversation because we aren't the big fancy cities some days. So that's my snapshot of my great city. Are you there, Bruce? Oh, Bruce, you're muted, Larry. Sorry.
Oh. There you go. Go ahead, Bruce. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Wonderful.
This is
that was a great snapshot, great overview. I'm wondering if you could briefly describe the effect of the economic shutdown on the various elements of the Dayton economy: small business, the University of Dayton, Wright-Pat, the Air Force Base. But Ohio stands out as being one of the early states to basically recognize how dramatic the impact of this virus was going to be, and Governor DeWine seemed to have acted with alacrity. And so you began to shut down relatively early.
Right.
And sustain that shutdown. And I'm wondering if you could describe for folks when this began and what kind of disparate impact it has had on different parts of the Dayton economy.
Sure. Yeah, we were one of the early states, and I think I give the governor a lot of credit for seeing it coming, and saved thousands of lives in our state because of how quickly we shut down. You know, Ohio is a city of states, and a former governor, Dick Celeste, that's what he described Ohio to be, is really a city of states. And we have multiple, from the three C's, as we affectionately call them, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, to the mid-sized cities of Dayton, Akron, and Toledo. And those have some urban density. And so we were at risk, particularly as people move in and out of Ohio pretty regularly for the virus. Because of that, though, also the cities it's a home rule state. And so we have a lot of, we're not funded very heavily by the state. We're self-funded mostly through municipal tax or income tax. And when everything was shut down very quickly, I think we shut down restaurants in the state March 15th, and they just are opening May 21st. That period of small businesses really has been just stopped. I talked to local furniture sales folks who had, furloughed 85 to 90% of their workers. Obviously, anyone that's in retail and local retail did not work in the half of March and all of April. And we're a city that is really just a group of small businesses. The base has a Dayton address. It's in no city. It's a federal installation. And so they have been dealing with the virus as a health concern, but obviously has slowed down pretty considerably for our defense contractors as well. So we've seen a pretty fast shut off here. What that means, and that's true for all cities in Ohio, where it was, I don't think anybody's really witnessed what we've seen in this country in cities where everyone's going about their business and the next day, and so quickly within a week, everything is completely different. And to lead through that and witness that, it's a sight to behold. And I was talking to someone just like going through each day from March 8th to like March 15th. It's amazing how quickly the change happened and how well people accepted it. That means there's a lot of economic anxiety in Dayton. Brookings Institute did a study of cities that will be most affected by COVID. Of the top 5 cities in the country, 4 are Ohio cities. Dayton is actually not one. I think it's because we have a little more safety because of the federal installation of the base. But the 4 cities are Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Toledo. And so we are just incredibly susceptible. Maybe we don't have the deaths or the sickness from the virus because of the fast work of the governor, but the economic fallout will be one of the most intense in the country.
For the folks on the call, I think what would be quite interesting is the mayors, to a large extent. Probably terrible to use a sports analogy, particularly for someone like me who doesn't follow any sports. But you're almost like a quarterback. Oh my Lord, there's me in a frozen pit. And as I've talked to other mayors around the country, as we've gone through the public health crisis, the economic shutdown, the beginning of small business relief with the Paycheck Protection Program and the SBA economic injury disaster loans, local relief funds being set up, then unemployment insurance beginning to cycle, filings cycle up dramatically. We're now at 36 million. What's the kind of role that you've been playing as you keep moving from crisis rock to crisis rock? In retrospect, some of this seems to be predictable in terms of the dominoes falling. But as we started this crisis, because we didn't seem to be getting clear guidance from the national level, everyone was sort of on their own to sort of adapt quickly to what was an immediate shut off and then the continued consistent, persistent crisis.
Yeah. So I
multiple roles.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. At some point, I'm going to get to process this job of being the mayor of a mid-sized city through some of these different fascinating challenges, and I haven't gotten to do that yet fully. But I'll say this: my staff says this too. I'm usually, because of the information that is we get as mayors, it's not the briefings of Congress, but we do talk to each other a lot. And like in Ohio, we talk to the governor and the state regularly and really daily. And because of that, I noticed for the people both on my team and then also to the community at large, I was around 5 days ahead of everyone in like the thought process of what was going to come. And I think that's, some of it is just as a leader, you have to start thinking about what's going to happen and prepare your community for that, right? And so you have to be a little bit ahead in that. I think someone calls it the space of, not too early and not too late, that area. And so you have to be a little bit early just to make sure that people are able to receive it, because, and I think that was really important. So I think the job of mayor through this has been multiple, as it normally is. One is to communicate to your community what's going on, to share best practices and model good behavior, and to be be blunt about things that, your community should or should not be doing. For example, in Dayton, I think for a good 2 weeks, I had to tell people, you cannot play basketball. I know this is killer for you, but basketball is not allowed anymore. And, there's for different communities, it's different pieces, but to know your community and know what's important, to them and to share what they can and can't do is really, really key. And there, you're right, there's been no consistent federal communication at all. So, it's fallen on state and locals for sure there. The second thing, which is more painful, is all of these systems, both in the state and federal government, were not set up to deal with the number of people that were going through these systems. And unemployment is a good example. They said in Ohio that 44% of the people were denied their unemployment claim due to human error. And really, that just tells you what a bad system it is. If over, nearly half the people had a human error, it really says the system is not set up for humans. And the calls and the notes and the pain that people in my community felt, and the stress and anxiety and the fear for taking care of their kids through this was nearly unbearable, frankly, because you couldn't do much but just call and bang on the state, and advocate on their behalf. It's not a system we control. So that is, I think that's been the toughest part, because there's so much in this pandemic that is out of the hands of mayors, but we're still the ones that have to communicate and the ones that advocate. And we're the ones where people call when they're the most frustrated, regardless of what system it is or whose system it is. So that's been a challenge. And then the final piece is, the governor is in a different party than the Democratic mayors of the state of Ohio. And we have gotten along and agreed fairly well until around the first or second part of May, where there's been a disagreement, about mask wearing and what does this mean? And so, it's hard when you've been working together in a crisis, but you have to speak the truth to your community. That's difficult, because you would prefer really for everybody, at least in the state of Ohio, to be on the same page all the time. And so managing that change and, keeping to your North Star, but also respect. I mean, I respect the governor. I just disagree with him on how he's handling it a bit right now. So those are the challenges I think that we continue to move through. The last thing I'm going to say, and this is the part that, I don't think, we spend a lot of time advocating for federal dollars because of this. We anticipate this economic fallout to be tough as a factor of 2 or 3 of the Great Recession. And Bruce, I was a city commissioner during the Great Recession, and it was miserable. And I had to get in, late March, I just had to get my head around, like, I don't really want to go through another, downturn and make terrible decisions about service delivery and what my community needs. We've done that. We cut the budget nearly, the staff nearly 40% during the Great Recession. And so, like, getting your leadership ready to be ready to do that. I'm still not there quite for what we're going to have to do to get through this economic downturn without federal help. And so that's, I think right now, that's on most mayors' mind. I don't think I'm any different than anybody else in that situation.
I want to follow up on that point, because the next legislative package coming out of Washington, in theory, is going to have to lead with fiscal relief for states and localities. And I think one of the interesting things about this crisis is that there was a lot of focus early on about how we were unprepared to deal with the health side of this. The pandemic office was dismantled, et cetera, et cetera. About 25 years ago, we dismantled the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. And what the ACIR used to do was be a steady stream of objective, independent research on the Federalist fiscal condition. So if you had a crisis like this, we actually had a bipartisan Federalist institution that you could turn to and say, what are 3 different scenarios, let's say, with the loss of tax revenue at the municipal level, at the county level, at the state level, and how do we think about the national government responding given its particular role? So at this point, we're in a situation where different experts, quote unquote, are basically saying we need $300 billion to $1 trillion of federal fiscal relief. And so we don't really have an objective scorecard here to begin with. But I thought, given your role in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, I thought it'd be helpful if you gave us a sense of what do you think is the scale of need of cities in the U.S., and if we don't meet that need, what's going to happen here? I don't think we really quite understand. If Congress doesn't act as the Fed chairman said they should, what's going to happen to cities like Dayton within a relatively short period of time?
Well, that's something I, hate to think about, but are forced to, because we don't have rational actors in the federal government right now. And like you said, it's not just economists on the right or the left. It's all economists are saying, please, you're going to have to put some more money into this economy. But so I'll just talk a little bit about what that means for local communities like mine. Immediately when the coronavirus happened, we knew right away that we like to say in Dayton, and before the pandemic, we said, the country gets the flu, the city of Dayton gets pneumonia. We are much more susceptible to economic downturns and recessions. We feel them much harder. We've always, the nature of our economy is one that happens, and mostly because it's basis around supply and demand of products and manufacturing. So we immediately froze every single position. We stopped funding anything that wasn't related to the pandemic. We furloughed 470 employees. We have around 1,900 employees, both for social distancing and to save some money, and kept police and fire on the front lines as well as trash pickup. But you can't sustain that because you're forgoing some of the back work that needs to keep the front lines going. We also sent to each department of Dayton, asking each of them what an 18% cut would look like. There is no way. Dayton's budget is around 60% police and fire, about 80% when you add public works, which is trash and street pickup. I tell folks, and it's the truth, we are not a fancy city. I'm proud of our grit and resilience, but there isn't anything fancy happening in the bowels of City Hall. It is, a very direct, get these services to the community that the community desperately needs, and their life and death services. So what will happen is you will see layoffs of first responders, and it is incredibly, I can't think of the word yet. It is disheartening. It is so un-American that the fact of the matter is that the federal government would say, oh yeah, these frontline responders who in Dayton have endured tornadoes, who've endured mass shootings, and who have now endured a pandemic, we're not going to help fund them because we just disagree with, how much money should be put into the systems while other things are bailed out. So there's been all kinds of words mayors have used about this, but that is where the cuts will happen because there's nothing else to cut in cities like Dayton. And that is painful, and it will affect the economy of the community for sure, and it will make the recovery slower. I was on a call when we were advocating for this with the U.S. Conference of Mayors with Mayor Bill Peduto, one of my dear friends from Pittsburgh, and he, I think, said it best, because one of the comments the Senate president said was, "Let them go bankrupt," and Peduto pointed out that Pittsburgh did go bankrupt 4 decades ago, and it took a very long time for Pittsburgh to recover. So allowing these cities to make these cuts, not providing help, will most definitely slow the recovery. We're talking about 10% of people that work in state and local government. It will affect communities' ability to provide frontline service. And it is a disservice to the public servants that put their lives on the line every single day in cities like Dayton to say that they're not worth it and are not valued, but other for-profit entities are. That's what you're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, that was about as clear and concise a statement of what's at risk here if we don't act. And what's surprising to me, starting about a week or so ago, I started looking at prior recessions and started looking at what information did we have at what time about state and local fiscal contraction and federal response. And I don't think that what we have yet is the kind of information that is daily provided to the American public by major media outlets, irrespective of their ideological stripe, that is making this point. It feels like most of what our nightly news does, again, hashtag Philly Citizen, why we need you, is say America strong. And, we'll have 10 minutes on a lovely story, which is obviously helpful from a psychological perspective of, a farmer in Kansas sends 3 masks to the governor of New York or whatever. But we don't really have any way of systematically understanding the domino effects, the knock-on effects of what has occurred because of a complete economic shutdown, and what's at risk if the only layer of our society and our federal system doesn't act fast and at scale. And so we're going to find this out if Congress does not act with the kind of investments that we need to act, when do you think we're going to begin to see the contraction in municipal employees that particularly help affect safety and security?
Well, every day I'm on calls with mayors, obviously, but the Ohio mayors, we're very close and we talk regularly. And particularly in Dayton, Akron, and Toledo, it will happen very, very quickly. And then cities even smaller than us, like Parma, which is a suburb of Cleveland, Drew Carey fame, for example. Parma's mayor says it very directly. They have no rainy day fund. They're about half the size of Dayton. They have no rainy day fund. And each budget they do, he uses an NCAA idiom of survive and advance. And that's what they do in good times, is survive and advance. So these decisions will happen in the second half of the year very quickly. I think all of the large cities in Ohio have already done MOUs with their public bargaining units. The bargaining units have been fantastic. When I called my FOP president to say, hey, this is happening. And this is so sad too. I know, Nan, we're in this together. We've always been in this together, and we will figure out a way through, even if that means that we have to let go of some police, which we really are very threadbare on police as it is. But the support of the public servants that are working that has been just amazing, because they're having to deal with terrible, terrible situations too. So you've seen stories today, for example, Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan and the New York, upstate New York mayors are already having to do this. Lovely Warren in Rochester and Kathy in Albany. Albany took her paycheck to $0 because she could not handle the fact that she was going to have to lay off police and fire and still be paid. Those are the kind of discussions that are happening right now.
Yeah, Larry, I think this conversation is just way ahead of the national discourse right now. The mayors have been having it for quite some time. The governors, obviously, as well. The counties are focused on this. But for some reason, in this crisis, it's not penetrating the Washington bubble. And it's being seen as a partisan issue, when really this is, tried and true federalism and the role of different layers of our system in different periods of crisis. This is really an outlier in some respects to the way we've acted in the past. And so we're going to be spending an enormous amount of time on this, because at some point we need to sort of break this, the national kind of barrier to something becoming the theme of the week, of the 2 weeks, of the month, which happened with the health crisis and ventilators and personal protective equipment and tests, which happened with small business, clearly, which will happen with Main Streets very, very shortly, but has yet to happen with municipal and state financing. it's almost like states and localities are being treated as like a separate constituency, almost like the cruise ship cluster. Asking,
no,
it's completely bizarre.
It is, and it's very strange. I mean, I've heard from Senate staff that the lobbying effort that the mayors have done. I've heard comments of this is the best effort they've seen in 15 years, and so I think the federal staff is hearing it, and the federal leaders. An example is 111 mayors of Texas sent a letter to Cornyn about what they needed. And, I mean, again, when you talk about the partisanship, if you have 111 mayors in Texas, I'm telling you, probably 90 of them at least are Republicans, right? So when you see that and you see Cornyn saying, "Oh, we need this," it seems very frustrating that it gets to the upper echelons and we're being, our police officers, our firefighters, our frontline workers are being treated like a chess game in a political season when we're really talking about life and death services. And so that is, I think, the big frustration we've had through all of these discussions. We are heartened by, the House's proposal. It is, what we've been asking for. And that's the first time that we've seen, frankly, cities not be an afterthought in the discussion of recovery.
Well, Larry, I think we can go to questions. I will say that for everyone listening to this, it's not like you heard it here first, but in 2 weeks, I guarantee this is going to be the conversation in the United States. If we do not act at scale to deal with the state and local fiscal issues from an economic shutdown that is unprecedented in our history, we are going to see a radically changed country in a very short period of time. And so just as we dealt sort of with the health crisis, just as we tried to put our finger in the dike on the small business collapse, we need to act here. I think there really is no other issue as important as this issue as we go to the next stage. So we can open it up for questions. And
look, we're joined by a questioner. Hi, Josh.
Oh,
hello.
That's one of the cool things with this technology is you can actually bring an audience member up to the screen, and so it's like a real town hall. What's on your mind, Josh?
I was curious about how you're dealing with any constituents who are kind of pushing you to reopen the city early. Like you have a big push from people to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the governor opened sooner than I would have done so for my community, mostly because it's an issue of testing. The 3 Cs, as we affectionately call them, Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, had testing before the cities of Dayton did. And my testing actually in this community just came in. I think they started doing qualitative testing for hotspots today. So if you think about it, they were opening patio seating Friday and, didn't have that quite done or set. So, I mean, I've been honest about it, frankly, went and said to restaurants like in Salon, yes, you can open on Friday the 15th. I don't think you should. And I've been amazed at the number of restaurants that said, we're going to wait until May 28th. They were going to wait until June 1st. And the countless ones that called and really wanted information about why was I saying that, explain it, and how much they cared about their employees and their clients. Yeah. It makes me just believe in small businesses even more. They are amazing. And I'm sure that's not just in Dayton, but that's across the country. So I mean, I'm in Ohio, where what do they call the displays started. Actually, the first one was actually against DeWine, and then they made them bigger when they went to Whitmer in Michigan. So I get a lot of that, but you just got to do what you think is right for your community. And I've continued to say what I think about that.
How do you set an example? Are you wearing masks out in public and all that?
Absolutely. Here's my handmade mask that I wear. This one my staff made about 3 weeks ago.
It looks like you have one of those ring lights in front of you.
Huh?
Looks like you have one of those ring lights in front of you.
Yeah, I do. I do have a ring light. And that's something else I've gotten from the pandemic is because I'm on Zoom all the time. So I need all the help I can get. And then this is when I made about 24 of these one weekend and gave them to my parents and some staff. And if you notice, it says like, I Whaley love you. What do you think? I got this fabric was of course in my basement. And my sister-in-law had the elastic, and then this is a t-shirt backing, which, you know, makes it a little softer on your face, but it's warm. It's a little warm for this. So, and we have an effort called All In for Ohio, where we've been doing mask challenges and encouraging, because, you know, there's a lot of angriness on social media. And so we've been doing that as well, doing challenges. And you can see Senator Brown and Connie Schultz wearing their masks, university presidents, just trying to model good behavior. And, you know, I won't be going to a restaurant probably until June, or my hair is getting a little long. It won't be happening until late June either.
Well, it looks good.
Thank you. I think that Bruce has a lot of power, and he just didn't want us to see his great mop of hair right now. I think that's what's really going on.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
What Jeremy used to say is that we had faces for radio.
That's right. That's right.
But so now we, but you know, no, it's just basically I'm a technological incompetent. But other than that,
here's a question for you, Mayor, and Bruce. I think you can chime in on this too. Is there anything you and your city government can do to get the testing, swabs, and contact tracing support and materials that doesn't seem to be coming from the federal and state governments?
There's not a ton we can do just because of the sheer need. We tried to advocate on behalf of our hospitals. And I have to give Governor DeWine a lot of credit. He really pushed through and found a way to get testing into the state. And those tests that I'm talking about that are starting May 18th are tests that came from the states, and they'll be able to do in this community 10,500 a week, which is great for us to be able to do nursing homes and our homeless shelters, where there's places where we think that the virus can move very swiftly. The hospitals have been pretty much been able to take care of themselves, and so they can get elective surgeries backed up. But I remember on one call, the governor's chief of staff equated to trying to find the reagents as the Hunger Games out there on trying to get reagents. So it's not something that we could get to scale in a community like Dayton. So I am grateful for the governor and his work on that.
One of the things I've learned from Bruce over the years, and certainly from his book, is that local government is not a government, it's a network. So what is the role and what is the level of conversations that you have with nonprofits? You mentioned university leaders. What is the communal response? What ought it to be at the local level?
Yeah, so I mean, the dirty secret of mayors, especially in Dayton, is we don't really have power, we have influence. And I think there's a real difference in that. And influence is very valuable too, but you know, you build it as a person, and it's not necessarily the position. The position holds some of that, but then the person can make it to influence things as much as they can by providing good leadership, is what I believe. So all kinds of ways that we've worked to leverage these networks. Number one, there's a network of mayors, both nationally and statewide. As I mentioned, the Ohio mayors are on a call every week, and the 7 cities are on a call every day, just so we can share, what are you doing about patio expansion? Anybody had this issue? How are you dealing with parks? You know, just the constant back and forth and sharing. When I talk about furloughing our workers, that actually started with Akron. Akron did that first, and we completely stole it from Akron and went on. The other thing is, you know, talking to our universities, you know, and making sure, like, for example, when we had to cancel the NCAA, that was a decision that the University of Dayton made. We talked to them regularly and constantly to see how we could be helpful, and, you know, helped aid them in making that decision. So it wasn't a decision I made or went out and publicly said. You know, we talked with folks. We do efforts to have small businesses connect and see putting systems in place like the Reopen for Business, where we've raised, $700,000 to give small loans to our Main Street efforts, just to hold them on, to get them as they continue to go on. And then, I remember the first week of the pandemic, I called United Way and said, like, you need to call the social service call. It needs to happen every week. And so, that's not something I need to lead, but I needed to make sure that there was a leader there. And I'm on that call every week to show support. The same with public health. I think this is a public health decision. So any of the media that we've done, I called public health and said, look, I've been through disasters. This is yours. I'll stand next to you every single day, but you've got to communicate to the public. So, I think that's what we do as mayors is very seldom are we in charge, even though everyone believes we're in charge. And so I think that's our role.
We're joined by another fellow citizen, Lynn. Hi, what's on your mind?
So I attend those Tuesday meetings with the nonprofits and United Way. And thank you for convening that. I work for the Red Cross, and we're requiring all our volunteers and our clients to wear masks as a step to get people to be kind of more aware, to protect our volunteers, to protect our clients. But how do we do that in the public? I mean, when you do venture out to the store, to go to the grocery store, you go to the doctor's office, I see 60, 70, 80% of the public not wearing masks. So what's the polite way to say, I care for you, can you care for others?
Lynn, it's a really difficult issue, and it's different in different parts of the city too, and the region is what I've noticed. And it's something that exasperates and can be, get you pretty down, right? I mean, if you're doing your part, and then you go and see no one wearing it, I talked to some of my staff that this happened to this weekend. It can be very tough. And what I think I don't have good news for you. I think it will get harder. Because as this issue becomes more tribal and more political, the mask issue has become this flashpoint for the partisanship that is Ohio. And I think that what we've tried to do, and this is why I do appreciate Governor DeWine in this too, modeling good behavior, showing folks that again, I'm not wearing the mask to protect myself. I think it's a patriotic act. An act for our country. When I get pretty upset about it, I think about folks that are like, I'm not going to wear this damn mask, and think of our forefathers in World War II and what they sacrificed. And it gets me pretty down about America, frankly, that we can't even sacrifice a mask for our fellow citizen. God help us if we ever got into a situation like my grandparents were in. And I think that's how I feel about it. And I don't have a good answer for it because of the walk back on public mask wearing. And we try to just model good behavior and tell people that we think that they should wear masks. And it's a way to, be a good citizen, that, this is a way you can show you're a good citizen. And then we also talk to businesses to try to encourage, like you are at the Red Cross and other businesses, to require masks as well. Some of them aren't willing to take that step. We have seen places like Costco that has made that step, and we need to praise those people that do that.
Thank you.
Hey, Lynn, thanks for your service. Appreciate all you guys do.
Oh, no, thanks for helping us.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Here's a question that Rosa asks from the audience. Do not know the situation of Dayton, but in Philly, the pension plans for city employees has been on an unsustainable track and abused in many ways. Does this urgent situation present any kind of opportunity in the mid and long term to right something that is unattainable?
Well, I think that's one of McConnell's concerns, is that we're just going to solve the pension crisis of cities. In Ohio, we do not, except for Cincinnati, all of us are in a state pension, and it's actually one of the best funded in the country. So we don't have this issue. And what we have said to the federal government is okay, if you're concerned about us, cities using, or the states using it for pension, put guardrails on it. You can't use it for pension. I mean, it's not very hard to fix that, if that's what they're concerned about. So I don't think that it will be used for pension. I know Illinois and Philly, there's other places that have a pension issue. But I don't think that is, certainly that's not where my concern is when I'm talking about these cuts. And I think more cities are. I have not heard a mayor say, "Oh, I need this money to fix my pension." I'll say that. It's all about the frontline services.
There was another question here. When making policy and budget decisions, how are you accounting for racial and class-based inequities in access to resources and potential exposure to the virus?
Yeah, so that is something that I think, and I'm glad that question was asked. That has been the hardest part of this pandemic so far, is when you are on the ground, you see the inequity and the unfairness of this disease and the economic fallout in just real horrific ways. Not just the data, right, that people are now becoming wise to, but the fact that in Cincinnati, the homicide rate is up 160%. In Dayton, it is up 50%. In the sense of most of the kids that go to Dayton Public don't have access to broadband, so they weren't able to get their schooling done, where the suburban kids had really no issue at all getting online. And the fact that most of the people that live in my city are the frontline workers that are going to be exposed. And they're the grocery store workers, they're the workers at the pharmacies, they're the ones providing the service. And to then see, the lack of support is really, really difficult. And it's frustrating because it gets further away, the further away you get from government. So in the state level and the federal level, childcare, for example, took forever to get an answer in Ohio. You know why? Because there's not a childcare lobbyist. There's a restaurant lobbyist. There's a tennis lobbyist. There's a golf lobbyist. Mm-hmm. And so the mayors for days were like, childcare, and we could not get an answer. And I fully believe it's because these are people that don't, women and children don't have as much of a voice. And that is going to be something that is not going to be changed unless our government changes, frankly. There's only so much that people that mayors can do, and mayors can scream and holler and cry, which we all do. But it is incredibly painful, and it is going to be the worst part of this pandemic.
Angela joins us. Hi, Angela.
Hi. So that was my question. So is this an opportunity to ask a follow-up question? Or?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry to bogart you there.
Okay, no problem. No, I'm a sociologist at Barnard College, Columbia, and I study the Black middle class, but I look at metropolitan areas more broadly and think about the Black middle class as embedded within metropolitan areas, and looking at issues of tax structure really, and how a lot of these issues that you're describing come down to just revenue streams and the ways in which disadvantage is concentrated, and the ways that those things have happened so historically. And so, as you're saying, they're really embedded and entrenched in this federal process. And I think I assigned Bruce Katz, of course, in my classes. So I mean, this is all sort of the core in many ways of what I try to teach students about why these things are so intractable. But I guess I'm curious, I mean, as you said, you're not always fully in charge of the decision making, but to the extent that you have some discretion about turning up the tap, turning off the tap, like one of the things we always talk about in the class is that authority is not the same as your willingness to do something. Like you can appropriate funds up to a certain amount, but it doesn't mean you will. It just means you can. And so I'm just wondering, like in these times of scarcity, as you're thinking about these really hard trade-offs, how are you going to decide between, like you said, trash pickup and something else? So in the county that I study, it's between the police and the schools. You've already accounted for 90% of the local budget, and so you're deciding between, core functions of government. So just wondering, like, what do those backroom conversations look like in terms of the criteria you're using? Are there any revenue streams that you all are thinking about? I mean, the watchword often is public-private partnerships, but I think are often a dubious exercise because, for-profit isn't going to do anything unless they're making good money on it. And they're probably already going to come anyway, so why are we giving away the store? But to the extent that there are any new ideas that mayors are floating or that they're petitioning state or local or federal government for, like what can we do as academics, as active citizens? Like what are some of the innovative things that maybe you all are thinking about that would get some momentum behind some of the things you're talking about at scale, as Bruce said, because I mean, these are deeply entrenched things that go back to slavery. As I tell my students, I'm like, let's go back to slavery and work our way forward.
Right. Well, thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for educating and being that voice. I mean, there's just, quite frankly, there's not enough voices in this. And so I'll talk a couple of things, ideas that we're working around. Number one, immediately we did an eviction moratorium in the city, the municipal court. So this is where it gets funky, right? So Dayton is a city. There's all these suburbs around it. Dayton's court does a moratorium. The suburbans did not. And so then it would be very confusing. I live in Huber Heights, Mayor. You said, I'm, even though I'm not in Huber Heights, I'm everyone's mayor. You said that I didn't have to, I wouldn't be evicted, and here I am. So that there was lots. We had to put a website up, so again, all this very unevenness on the local governments. We still did that. We're still under that. We stopped water shutoffs immediately, just trying to keep people in their homes during this time. The schools, started moving school buses around the neighborhoods to provide Wi-Fi, and we're now in discussions because of some of the CARES dollars that the public health may receive. Is there a way we can do municipal Wi-Fi across the city to take this issue away? So for both telehealth and education reasons, right? So we're trying to think of ways that we can, have some silver linings in this pandemic to provide some services that are obviously, we've been talking about for years, desperately needed and need to help to bridge some of this inequity. And so championing that work. We are desperately working on getting more rental assistance here. The feds have, I think, granted a little under $4 million for Dayton and its region. We're trying to get the county to put more money in that, so we advocate there. We did not receive the CARES dollars that were for that work, so we're trying to push there, pushing on the state for rental assistance. So again, all of the mayors in the state have been pushing around that. And then, Ohio is a place that doesn't have a stay-at-home order. So if you pay your rent in full and pay all the court costs, you could still be thrown out. And so trying to figure out, there's about 15 states that do have stay-at-home order, or pay if you stay if you pay. I always get it backwards. Stay if you pay. And so we're trying to advocate that. And then thinking if there's a way that we cannot get it, is there a way that all municipals can band together and do it at the same time? So that there is a way that we try to do that. And we've done this on a couple of other things. The other thing, there's a group of elected leaders that aren't mayors, but some mayors are in the group, about getting voting figured out a little better for November in Ohio, and starting to advocate on that, because if you probably in Philadelphia, you weren't paying attention to people in Ohio, remember that they canceled the election the day before in Ohio, rescheduled it to April 28th. We had desperate turnout. If a second wave happens, when the stakes are much more higher than a primary in Ohio, what is that going to be? And so, you're talking about the straight disenfranchisement of many, many people in my community. And then, there's the count on for the census, right? Which is so key too. And so we've been trying to figure out ways that we can make sure that folks that are disenfranchised generally, and, frankly, don't have cell phones, or, don't have Wi-Fi, are suspicious of mail, really only we can get them as face-to-face, and we can't do face-to-face. And so, trying to work through that and extending the census deadline. So we are trying to think of things, and there's there are so many things that we have to remind ourselves at the mayor's office. Okay, what is the one that is most likely to win, or what is one that this just cannot stand? And so we have to make a values case on this. And so childcare, for example, was one of those for us. Mm-hmm. And
I think Nancy Pelosi would be behind you on that one. I mean, there are, there are more women in Congress now who I think we get their first woman senator would breastfeed on the floor. I mean, obviously, I don't want to take symbolic gestures as sensitivity, but I think the point about who's lobbying is really important. But I don't feel like it's falling on deaf ears. I think it's the politics, as you said. It's Mitch McConnell. It's, certain people with inordinate power, and the chairman and often men of these committees. So anyway.
We'll keep pushing. Honestly, I do things like this too, because you all give me some more oomph, and I appreciate that, because, it's some days it's like, oh gosh, I don't have a ton of power. And so just to try to use the influence I have to make a change for people that don't have a voice. That's what we're really, really trying to do. And then also keep our little city chugging, right?
Thank you so much, Angela. Bruce, you're still with us, right?
I'm still with you.
Great. I wanted to ask you, because Angela said something about that public-private partnerships are often dubious. You and I have talked a lot about this. Public-private and nonprofit is sort of the only way we have left, right? I mean, you're not as pessimistic about you, or you think that's the only way we have to go at this point. Is that right?
Well, the bottom line is there's a lot of innovative ways, both within the U.S. and outside the U.S., for the public and private sectors to work in concert with each other. During this crisis, what has occurred is that a group of community development finance institutions, CDFIs, the ones who really do provide the kind of quality capital and customized loan products to minority businesses, they have entered into some very interesting collaborations with large financial institutions. This happened in Chicago. It's about to happen in New York State. I think it'll be announced tomorrow. So there are ways in which the public sector and private sector can work very closely together, particularly around innovative finance solutions. And when you've degraded the public sector as much as we've degraded in the U.S., and when you've frayed the safety net as much as you frayed it in the U.S., we have to find these new kind of collaborative and new kind of innovations to move forward. So what could come out of this, actually, another silver lining, though we do not want to underestimate how brutal the impact of this second great recession is going to be, is we may make the community development finance industry much more scaled and more influential and more impactful than it has been to date. And we may actually find an enormous innovation on financial products so we can begin to grow community wealth and the ownership of business by Black and brown. So, public-private, like many of the things in our society, is a continuum. And so we need to think about those parts of the continuum that can have the kind of transformative outcomes that we're all seeking. There are other bits where, out of desperation, the public sector is forced to do certain things which it should not otherwise do. But I think some parts of what some initiatives coming out of this crisis is a point to the future of a much more equitable and fair financial system.
That's, as usual, really well put. And I can't thank the two of you enough. Mayor, you have a couple times, and we'll end with this, a couple times talked about your perceived lack of power. But I wonder if, and when you mentioned that, you have to tell people that they can't play basketball, you actually have, and this goes to your point about power, you actually have no power to enforce that. But what you have, right? I mean, you can't actually lock people up for playing basketball.
We can break up basketball games, but that's like they can come 10 minutes later and come play.
Right,
so,
right. So what you really have is the power of persuasion. And I wonder if that's how you see your role, because a couple times tonight, and again, and last night we had a session with the Attorney General, and it seemed to me, I think both of you have modeled for us the power of persuasion through empathy and through actually listening and facts. And so, like Bruce said that there's an opportunity here to become more equitable. There's also a leadership opportunity here to actually. I found myself, after listening to you tonight and listening to the Attorney General last night, thinking about a different way of thinking about leadership. Your thoughts?
Well, that's very kind of you. I think I'll tell you this. When I was younger and just started to be elected official, there was a lot of people that talk about leadership all the time. And I was like, what do you mean? Why do you need to talk about this? Just like get this done and do it. And as I've been mayor longer, I do think about what leadership means and have become very appreciative of the people that think about how leadership is done. And it's been helpful to me. I think you're right. I think just to tell a story, when I first became mayor in 2013, when I decided to run, I actually beat an incumbent mayor, and I beat a man who'd been not the incumbent member mayor, and another man who had been in elected office for 30 years. And so I'm told that they would get together and say, "Oh, poor Nan, she's so nice, but she doesn't have a prayer," and was considered quite an outsider. And I decided to run for mayor because when I announced, I felt nobody was paying attention to the mayor. I didn't think he did a very good job, and maybe that's why. But I ran saying, like, look, the mayor of Dayton should matter. It should matter when the mayor comes. It should mean something. It should. When the mayor says something, it should be meaningful to both the people in the community, but people outside the community. And so that is something that really drove me to the position, as I wanted to be able to use the position in a way that it could be a voice for the community. And I am very grateful for the people of Dayton that they do pay attention. Some heartily disagree with me and tell me so regularly, and I appreciate that too. But I am really grateful, and that's, I think, the secret of leadership sometimes is people want to get really worked up with leaders, but leaders only work if they have people that listen to them and follow. And so the support of the people of Dayton is really where my influence comes from. And I learned that very well in 2019 and continue to learn that in 2020. I had a friend that said to me, because I told people they couldn't have friends over, like, don't have friends over, like early on, like, don't do it. And so a friend said, well, we were going to have friends over to play some board games, but then they saw a tweet and they said, well, I just can't disappoint Nan. So it made me feel good. Maybe, at least my friends are listening to me a little. But I think I think it's also important to know that, you don't get that just with the title of mayor, right? I think, someone said to me when I went through what happened in 2019, Nan, how would have that worked if you had just been mayor in 2014? And I would not have been prepared, frankly. So you learn so much in the job and on the job and this stuff. And I'm really grateful the people of Dayton let me continue to learn.
That's great. Bruce, do you have a final thought to take us out on?
No, I think everyone has seen just what a special person, an inspirational leader Nan is. And, she can geek out with the best of them. and it's a point in time where we need to have facts and evidence on the table, particularly with so much at risk. But I think she really calls on our better angels. And it's just been wonderful to get to know her, to visit Dayton and see the transformative effect she's had on our city.
Well, we are very lucky for Bruce. He's our favorite person to quote in Dayton. So we're very grateful that he is such a big fan of ours, and we love him.
Well, this has been terrific. Thank you both so much for taking the time. Bruce, thank you for calling in the middle of a weather event. Look for, we'll be doing more of these virus in the city get-togethers with Bruce and various mayors, and hopefully we'll have Mayor Whaley back. But this has been terrific. I can't thank you both enough, and thank you all for coming. And we'll be announcing some new programming in the next few days. Thank you all.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.